Welcome, my name is Jarel, and maybe you are confused or in a state of despair looking at your purchasing power that is always going down and you want to know why. We have this fantastic technology and we could live in a paradise, but it's getting harder and harder to get a living. Why is that? So we have to look at our economic system. A lot of people are talking about at the moment of a collapse. The collapse of the ecosystem, the collapse of resources. What I want to present to you today is a collapse. What is collapsing is the economic system. Actually, it is a free market. The free market is collapsing, is dying, and will never come back. So it's a big claim because we have been living with the free market for thousands of years. So it sounds a bit arrogant to say that it's dying now and will never come back. So for that, I will have to present you a new model, an original model, and make an original analysis that will take you from the Middle Age up to now and take you through the different transformations of the free market. And I have identified 5 transformations, and the last one being the one that will bring the collapse. And by doing that, we will also identify the dysfunctions of the free market. And dysfunctions, there are many dysfunctions. For example, why do we have this debt that is always increasing, and whatever the government, we cannot solve the problem of the debt, it's always increasing. Why do we have that? Why do we have this? It's true that there is no balanced state. We cannot stabilize the economy. We have to be always in growth, otherwise we have recession. Why is that? Why do we go through these cycles of growth and recession? Why do we destroy our productive infrastructure when there is misery? And why do we do that? It's completely absurd. So you will be able to understand this thanks to this, because it can be very complex, but it's in a simplified way. It can be explained through this model. And once you identify the dysfunctions clearly, you can find solutions. It's like they appear automatically. So we will design or present 2 economic systems, one being an economic system that is transitional to the other one, and that will create a real paradise on Earth. So we will have this collapse, but what's coming next is a new economic system that will bring a paradise. So it won't be a doomed presentation. It's actually a finish. It's a happy ending. But don't go to the end straight away, because you might reject the solutions, because part of the solutions is something that is dear to you. You will have to let go something that is dear to you, but that is absolutely necessary if we want to create this world of abundance that is possible through technology. So don't go straight to the end. Go through the whole process so that you will be able to accept the solution that will be presented. And I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you. We can divide society in 2 categories. On one side, you have the owners of the means of production of goods and services. To call them the owners of the means of production, it's a bit long, so I'd like to call them a shorter name. I could call them the capitalists, but it sounds like a class struggle. So I will call them the rich, even though it will still reflect a class struggle. But there is no better name. Those who want to enrich themselves, create or invest in means of production. And on the other side, you have all the others, those who need all the products, the goods and services, and we can call them the people or the consumers, even though everybody is a consumer. So let's give to the consumers an amount of money, and let's do like we do in every good investigation. Let's follow the money. The people will give their money to those who own the means of production, and in exchange they will receive the goods and services they provide. So now what's happening? The rich will spend the money between themselves to ensure the production and also for their lifestyle.
But then the money will have to come back to the consumers, because the consumers have needs every day and they are the same needs every day. So hopefully the same amount of money will have to return to the consumers. And for the money to come back to the consumers, to the people will have to work for the rich to receive a salary. So it's a new form of enslavement. For 40 hours and plus, the people will be like the servants of the owners of the means of production, and the masters like the slave masters. So it's a system of enslavement. It's not ideal, but that's how it works. Among the people, not everybody works for the rich, and some are artists, for example, or craftsmen, or work for themselves. So some of this money can be spent between the people before returning to the rich for buying their products. When we spend money, whether we are rich or poor, we can spend it in two ways: in consumable and perishable products that lose their value through time, or in products that can be resold and keep some value through time. For the sake of this presentation, let's call an asset everything that we buy that keep a value through time. And we will represent it by a piece of paper with a scribble on it and a signature. And this piece of paper says, I own this. It is attached to a product, or it can be a property, a car, anything of value. But this asset, this piece of paper, gets its real value only when you can sell it. So the money will circulate in a loop that links all the participants, whether we are rich or not. And the money will flow like a liquid, and we speak actually money as a liquidity. So each time the money goes from one person to the next, some services have been given, but also sometimes some new product has been created. And that means we have created new wealth into the system. And what's important to notice is the larger the amount of money that is circulating in this loop, or the faster the money circulates in this loop, the more wealth we create. Here you can see, if you want to create wealth more quickly, you just have to inject some money into the system and increase the number of exchanges. Or you could also increase the speed at which money is spent. For example, during Christmas time, people buy more products, but also at a faster rate. And conversely, if you want to reduce the rate at which you create wealth, you reduce the amount of money in the system. In other words, to have some growth and more prosperity, we need to inject money into the system. And to slow down the growth or to go into recession, we need to remove money from the system. How do we inject money into the system? It's by making a loan to a bank. When you make a loan to a bank, the bank writes the amount of money you need or you ask for into your bank account, and it doesn't come from another bank account. It's created out of thin air. It's different with cash. Cash comes only from the central bank. It's when the central bank buys some bonds, some IOUs from the public or mainly from the government, that the central bank creates the cash. So, and how do we remove money from the system? Normally, we don't want to remove money from the system. We better have more than not enough. We remove the money from the system by reimbursing loans to the bank. When we reimburse our loan to the bank, the money is destroyed. But only the repayments of the loans will be destroyed. The interest, which are the payments given to the bankers for their services, are not destroyed, but will continue to circulate in the loop. So we need to represent the banks at two different places. The banks are the places where the money is created and destroyed, and it is represented by the yellow and orange arrows on the diagram. But also the bankers collect the interest of the loans, interest which can be quite significant, and on the long term bigger than the amount that has been loaned. And the amount of the interest is part of the purchase of the goods and services and continue to circulate in the loop. Here we notice already the power that is given to the banks and the money lenders in general, the power to expand or contract the economy and to create growth or a recession. In that way they can support or impeach governments by supporting or not their policies. If they want to get rid of a government, it's very easy for them to create a recession and blame the government for the bad state of the economy. This has been used many times in the past and in the present. All the crises, except when they are created by a natural phenomenon like a big storm or a flood, or when they are created by a shift in technology. For example, the arrival of the car has destroyed the horse industry. Otherwise, all the crises are created by a lack of money into the system, and they are financial crises. And the responsibilities relies on those who don't inject enough money into the system. There is another way when money is removed from the system. It is when you store it, when you keep it at home in a safe, for example. It is no more in circulation and it will be counted as an asset until it is spent again. There are also some leaks in the system. If the people lose some money, some cash, or if we have a trade deficit and the money is not returning back to the country, but keeps circulating outside the country. It is true for the US dollar, which is used for international trade and reserve currency, but also the euro, which can circulate within the eurozone. And on the opposite, if we have a positive trade balance, the money that is circulating outside the country can return back as an injection of money in the economy. Let's represent now the flow of money over a period of time, for example, 1 month. And the size of the arrows will represent the amount of money that has been exchanged. Let's suppose now that we have no leaks and the foreign trade is balanced. We have then 3 possibilities. The first one is when the consumer's income is greater than the amount of money they spend to buy the products from the rich. This case actually doesn't happen globally. It happens locally. It's when a business doesn't sell enough, doesn't make enough money to pay for the wages. And so this business is going bankrupt, so it will have to raise the prices of its products, or it will have to be more productive by reducing the payroll, by firing some people, or by reducing the salaries. In the free market, to survive, a business has to be profitable. So there is a selection that is happening here. Those who go bankrupt, those who cannot make their business profitable, will have to return to the other side, and they will have to work for the rich and be their servants. Another possibility is when the consumers spend more money buying the products than the money they have received by working for the rich. And we have here the case that is completely absurd, but unfortunately that is happening all the time. It's when the consumers cannot even afford the products they have themselves produced. To buy the production, the consumers must have borrowed money or have bought at credit. Or maybe they have had to use some savings and sold some assets to the rich. To borrow money or to sell assets is not something desirable, and it cannot last a long time. It's not sustainable. So the consumers will have to adjust their consumptions to the level of their income. They will buy less to spend only the amount they have earned and not buy the amount of products they have or they could have produced. The system will then evolve naturally towards a balanced state, which is the third case. It's a case where the amount of money spent to buy the products is the same amount that is received by the consumers as wages. But this balanced state is unstable. First, because when returning to the balanced state, the consumers buy less products, so the production has reduced and the profit has reduced. And if the production reduces, the businesses, to keep being profitable, will have to decrease the payroll and fire some people. So the total income of the consumers will be diminished. And the second reason is that in this balanced state, all the money that has been received from the sales of the products will have to be spent as a form of salaries. So globally, there is no savings to be made by the rich. And it is against the principles of the rich not to save any money and enrich themselves. So they want to see the money in their bank account increase. And if their business is not profitable, why doing business? This is the purpose of being in business, is to make money. We can represent everything on a graph, representing the income and the spending of the consumers. And the balanced states are represented by a blue line at 45-degree angle. Above the blue line is where the wages, the total wages of the consumers are greater than their spending. So it is the case where globally the businesses are losing money and it's not possible. Below the blue line, below the balanced state line, it's where businesses don't spend everything in salaries and can save some money and put it in the bank. On the blue line, it is a balanced state where you are all the money earned by the rich through the spending of the consumers returned to the consumers as salaries. So the more money in the system, the higher the balanced state on the line, the more dynamic the economy and the more wealth we produce, and the lower the amount of money in the system, the lower the balanced state, and the slower the economy. The owners of the means of production, the rich, don't want to spend all the money they earn, but want to save some of it and put it in the bank. And for that, they will have to operate below the blue line. The further away from the blue line, the more savings they can make. For the next period, the consumers will have less money to spend. How much less money? The amount that has not returned, that is the amount that has been put aside by the rich. The consumers will want to spend at the level of their income, that is at the level of the balanced state. But there are some leaks. They have to pay back their loans, because all the money comes from a loan, so they have to pay back their loans. So it will have to be a lower balanced state. And on top of that, the businesses want to make some money and reduce the salaries to end up below the blue line, below the balanced state. So the system, if nothing is done, will spontaneously go from a higher level of income and expenditure to a lower level of income and expenditure. So that means it will go spontaneously into recession. And we start a spiral of recession that can continue until everybody goes broke. So the economists who say that we should let the free market operate freely are completely mistaken. There is no invisible hand that will find a balance that is stable and fair. You know, the law of supply and demand, which should be called, demand, it's a bit deceiving. It's a bit like demand is like the needs of the people, but actually it's the income of the consumers. It's a law of the income of the consumer and the supply, but it's dictated by the income of the consumers. And the supplies follows the level of the consumer's income that always tend to decrease. It is the owners of the means of production who can decide for both the prices of the products and the level of the wages. So the system will always be set to operate in their favor and at the expense of the consumers. The fact that there is no stable balanced state is a big problem because we need always to have growth. We cannot stabilize without going down. So we need always to grow. We are addicted to growth. We always need to find new markets. We need to create new fashions to make the products old-fashioned quickly. We even have to plan obsolescence. Businesses try to replace their products as soon as possible to maintain a high level of consumption and to justify more salaries. Otherwise, we go into recession. The purpose of the owners of the means of production is to make money, is to enrich themselves, and they can only do that globally if the economy is growing. So if we don't want to have growth and all the problems it generates, we will have to change the system. Because this system, the free market, cannot function well without growth, without growing all the time. We must not confuse growth and progress. Progress is to make things better and faster. Progress really adds to our quality of life. Growth is to make more and more products, sell more and more stuff, so we justify more salaries and more profits. So growth is about making more and more, and if possible, more and more expensive. And progress, it's making things better, faster, and cheaper. We have seen that to create growth, we need to inject money in the system, and we inject money when we make loans at the bank. The rich have no problems to make loans because they have assets as collateral. They make loans sometimes because they are in a difficult financial situation, for example, to pay for the salaries, but mainly to expand their factories or to create new factories because there is a potential for a market to grow or because of new markets that have been created by entrepreneurs. So they will create jobs and increase the amount of salaries and therefore the amount of spending, and all the flow of money in the system will increase. But this does nothing to the gap, to the discrepancy between the consumption and the income of the consumers. To close the gap, to supplement their income, the consumers will have to borrow some money at the banks. But the banks are not especially keen to lend money to people who don't have any assets, unless it is at a very high interest rate, like with the credit cards. However, the banks will be keen to lend money to the consumers for their two main purchases, that are the house and the car. Because they are assets, you can repossess a house or repossess a car. If the consumers put a bit of money as deposit, it is likely that the banks don't lose any money when they repossess and resell the purchase. At this stage, you understand how important it is for the system that the consumers keep borrowing money to buy their houses and their cars, and hopefully new houses and new cars, so that it also creates jobs. Because it is this borrowing that will allow a gap between the spending and the income of the consumers. And now you understand the importance of giving the people the ideal of the American dream. To be happy, you have to own your house and your car, and you can borrow money, and hopefully you make a big family, because you need more people borrowing money than you have people paying back their loans. So the family needs to have many children. The population, to ensure the growth, need to always increase. The system, the free market as it is today, needs the borrowing of the consumers to complement their income to pay for the goods they have themselves produced and to ensure both the growth and the enrichment of the rich. And on top of that, it will ensure that the consumers will have to work for the rich for 30, 40 years to pay back their mortgage. So these borrowings act like a chain or the chains that enslave the consumers who will have to work for the rich every working days of the week for many, many years. If we now sum up the flows of money in the system, we can consider the rich don't need to borrow more money than they need to pay back their loans. And we can observe that the money flows from the consumers to the rich, and that all the money that is injected in the system through loans will end up in the pocket of the rich. The free market today is a system that enriches the owners of the means of production and enslaves the people through loans. So now we have a problem. We have banks that can create money out of thin air, inject it in the system, and that goes to the rich, who accumulate something that is not worth accumulating. The purpose of the money is to circulate between the people to facilitate the exchanges, and it cannot or it shouldn't be accumulated somewhere in a bottleneck. If the rich accumulate too much money and there is too much money in the system, the money stops to be desirable and the system stops functioning. The money becomes worthless. So let's find out what the system will do or can do to make the money circulate from the rich back to the consumers. Because this is the problem. How can the money return to the consumers when it flows only in one direction towards the rich? In every system of flows, wherever you have a flow, you need to have somewhere a pump. For example, in the body, you have the heart that sucks the blood on one side and push it on the other side, so the blood circulates in the whole body. So what is the pump of the system that allows the money to circulate from the rich to the consumers so that the money circulates in a loop and is not and cannot accumulate in a bottleneck somewhere? To complete the diagram and to understand how the free market is working today, we need to go back in time and find out the different transformations it went through. There are many important transformations, and the last one is the one we are living today that will put an end to the free market. It is the final and fatal transformation that will bring about something that will be, thankfully, much better. Let's go back as far as the Middle Ages, and then the system was feudalism. And the monarch had all the powers, the political, but also he was making the law, and he has the economic power. He was the one able to create money. The money was then made of precious metals like gold and silver. And the free market was opening on a marketplace. Every city, every town had a place where the people were free to come and buy and sell their products. The people who were craftsmen and farmers were competing on an equal basis. And this fair competition made sure that the level of supply and the prices of the goods and services made both the buyers and the sellers happy. The free market appeared quite naturally all over the world, and it has worked for hundreds and even thousands of years. So now to claim that the free market is actually over, it's actually dying and should be replaced, it's a pretty big statement, and we will understand why. The big problem at the time was the money, the supply of money. With the growth of the population, you need more money, and you need to develop your economy. For that, the monarch needs to find more gold. And if he cannot find more mines, he had to find it elsewhere. So there is two possibilities. Either you develop the trade and the foreign trade and you bring gold in the country, or you go and get the gold elsewhere and you conquer others around you, and you plunder the neighboring countries and to get their gold. Peaceful civilizations like China have chosen trade, and more barbarian civilizations like like the European countries have chosen the conquest. And the great monarchs were those who were bringing prosperity in the country by plundering others. And unfortunately, this has not really changed. Notice that the flow of money between the monarch and the people is in favor of the people. The monarch, by building his castle, having his lavish lifestyle, and having this great army, was actually spending the gold and injecting the gold into the economy, and was also raising taxes from the people, but the balance was in favor of the people. The monarch owns the gold mines and can create the money, so there was no need for the monarch to keep any money. He was the source of the money, and he was the one injecting it in the economy, and not extracting it from the people. In other words, the monarch is spending all his money, and there is no need of a pump from the monarch to the people. There was also another problem, is that gold is precious and keeps its value through time. And the people, for their personal security, for the future, will want to keep it and hold it and accumulate it. So, and when they do that, the gold stops circulating, the money stops circulating. And it's a problem because it contracts the economy and it creates recessions. Since feudalism, the system has been through 5 different transformations, the last one being the one we are living now, and the first one being the creation of paper money and the apparition of banks. With the development of trade, some merchants enriched themselves and needed a secure place to put their gold. And the most secure place in town was the safe of the goldsmith, the people who were working with gold. And so they put gold in their safe in exchange of a receipt. And this receipt could even be exchanged. It started like this. The people trusted that when they brought this receipt to the goldsmith, they could get the amount of gold written on the receipt. So instead of transporting gold, the people were passing on receipts, which in fact are like IOUs. It was easier and safer than carrying gold and taking the risk to be robbed. So the goldsmith who saw that the gold was staying in their safe and was not used started to make other receipts and started to lend this gold to other people. So it has started as a fraud by lending the gold that they didn't own, and of course by charging interest and make easy money. So they started to make a lot more receipts than they had gold, because the gold was staying in the safe. So they understood that they could create money out of paper. But it was still possible for the people to ask for their gold in exchange of their receipts. But hopefully they won't ask for their gold at the same time, and it will be okay. And this has very much enriched the goldsmiths, who have become bankers and started to make loans with paper money, as the people were preferring using the IOUs, the receipts, and the gold was always returning in the safe. The people much prefer to keep the gold in the much more secure bank's vault than to keep it home. So this was a fraud, but a very beneficial fraud, because it has allowed a large amount of money to be injected in the system. It has allowed the economy to develop. without having to find new gold mines to create more money. So the apparition of banks that can create money and lend it has been a big change in the system, and has allowed the economy to develop tremendously, and the Renaissance. And on top of all the gold that was coming from the colonies, this has allowed the enormous expansion. And we have had the Renaissance with all those beautiful castles and art pieces that we enjoy now. So that was the first big transformation. The second big transformation is the arrival of the machine. The loom, the steam engine, the Industrial Revolution. And most importantly, groups of people creating new economic entities like businesses, companies, and corporations. New entities with unlimited lifespan and almost unlimited powers, against which single individuals have no chance to compete. The companies and the corporations will take over progressively all the production at the expense of handicraftsmen. No single individual can compete against tens, hundreds, or even thousands of people working together. The arrival of the companies and corporations will completely change the free market. The free market is the law of the jungle. It's a competition. It's a big fish that eats the small fish. So when you introduce those very big fish, all the small fish get eaten. The supporters of the free market always refer to the time when competition was between human beings of similar skills and size. This free market is long gone. It has progressively disappeared with the takeover of all the business by the companies, leaving only the crumbs or niche markets for human beings or self-employed human beings. From then on, there will be two markets: the traditional market, the craft market, the farmer market, that is dying and will keep shrinking, and the market where the businesses and the owners of the means of production compete, and that will keep growing. And on top of that, we can add another market, the job market, where the people will compete to get the jobs the owners of the means of production consent to give us. That's the market for the slaves, the slave market. For the supporters of the free market, they call it free market, but it is a freedom for the slave masters, the owners of the means of production, to compete between themselves and eliminate each other to form big monopolies. And it is also the freedom for the people, for the slaves, to compete between themselves for the jobs to serve them. That's what they actually support, and they call it free market. But actually, in the last 200 years, the people have lost their sovereignty to serve masters, the owners of the machines and the means of production. The third big transformation is the takeover of all the powers by the banks, or to be more precise, by the moneylenders. With the growth of trade and industry, the bankers made a lot of money, so much so that the monarchs were begging them for loans to finance their projects, and especially their wars. And they have very quickly discovered that the war is a fantastic tool to put the countries and the monarchs into debt and exercise a control over them. They have also very much understood that by financing both sides of the war, you can even make a lot more money. And you can even control the issue of the war by favoring the one you want to see win. The wars are the most costly, and the monarchs are ready to spend as much as it's necessary to save their powers. And they are ready to borrow as much money as it takes to win and save themselves. But the monarch was still capable to oppose the bankers, and to sometimes expel them because they were making the law. And some monarchs, like the Tsar of Russia, have very much opposed the bankers. And when I speak about the bankers, I speak about the international money lenders. And for that, the Tsar will pay a big price. The international bankers and moneylenders, who became so rich and powerful, start to see the monarchs as a nuisance and start to actually conspire. Yes, we can speak about a conspiration. They conspired to get rid of the monarch or limit very much their powers, and to introduce instead a representative democracy, because it is much easier to control the representative of the people than to control a monarch, especially if you have a lot of money. So they started to organize revolutions to topple the monarchs. They organized themselves and started to infiltrate some secret organizations like the Freemasons by creating secret organizations within secret organizations, so as to recruit their agents and to promote them in the structures of governments and their administrations. But also they infiltrated opposition movements and revolutionary movements and were creating very difficult economic conditions by contracting the economy, the flow of money. They were making life difficult for the people so that they revolt. They have taken possession of the media, the newspapers, and they have organized smear campaigns against the monarchs or their government. They were inciting revolts and revolutions. They started with a revolution in England and imposed some favorable legislation leading to the creation of the Bank of England that they controlled. So they were getting the control of the economy and the creation of money. They officialized the fractional banking, where they were authorized to multiply the amount of money they could create from the deposit of their clients, and just keep a fraction in reserves. Then they continued with the independence of the United States, and then they followed it up with the French Revolution, when they toppled the monarch and installed a representative democracy, which for them it's much easier to control and manipulate. So since then there have been many wars and revolutions, and we can say that almost all the wars and revolutions have been organized or financed by the international bankers or moneylenders. And this includes the Bolshevik Revolution and the elimination of the Tsar. And Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin have all been financed by the international bankers. And even Mao Zedong in China, and this has continued until today with the colored revolutions and the Gulf Wars and so on. So, of course, this is not the official history, because the official history is always written by the winners. And the winners have always been the bankers. So you will never see that in the media that belong to them. No, you need to find that on the internet. It's available for everybody. It's not so difficult to find. There are actual documents that have been found and that confirms the conspiration and the takeover of all the powers, the economic and political powers, by the international bankers. And this continues until today. And amongst those documents, there is one that is very important, one that dates from the 1770s, which reveals this conspiration and the takeover of other powers on top of the destruction of the religious power. Their ultimate goal is to create a world government progressively by toppling the monarchies and replacing them by structures they can more easily control. And this puppet government will be succeeded after a chaos that they will have organized by a world government. And the procedure is to recruit agents, if possible, by inspiring them with this great vision of a world government that will bring peace on earth. And that's true, a world government will bring peace on earth and put an end to wars. But what they don't say is that they will be in control of this government. Other ways to recruit agents is to corrupt them with money or with sex and to blackmail them or threaten them. But many will join the project without really knowing its scope. They will be seduced by big values like liberty, equality, fraternity, and they will join the project thinking they will bring a fantastic liberation of humanity. But in fact, they have been completely manipulated to put in place a structure that is totally controlled by the international bankers. And in this document, the procedure explains very clearly that the controlling of the people is made by division and terror, by dividing the people and terrorizing them of each other. By dividing and terrorizing, it is possible to put the people into submission. When people are put into groups and are made afraid of each other, they are more easily manipulated and will be ready to submit themselves to whomever can offer them protection. So in some documents it is clearly explained that the world would be divided in two parts that will oppose each other in two different models. The capitalist model with its extension liberalism, and another model that will be called communism. Both systems will be based on the great notions of liberty, equality, fraternity to get the maximum support of the population. One system will be more free than egalitarian capitalism, and the other one will be more equalitarian than free communism. Let's go back to the diagram representing the flow of money. The king and the nobility, the owners of the land, the means of production, will be joined by the owners of the machines as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution. And let's introduce a newcomer, the government of the people, following the toppling of the monarch and the installation of what we have called democracy. We see it appear as a parallel circuit that will attempt to regulate the flow of money. The government has some income, so it provides some services from industries that have been nationalized, like transport, electricity, water. But also it raises taxes, that is an important part of its income, taxes to the rich and the businesses, and of course taxes to the people and all forms of licenses and consumption tax. And also the government has some expenditures like the reimbursement of the debt, also the cost of the service it offers. For example, one of the big costs is the security, the military, but also the infrastructure. And most of it will go to the owners of the means of production. And also the payment of the salaries of the civil servants. And last but not least, social aid to the people. And also the government has some assets, like the land, the forest, but also the hospitals, the schools, and the infrastructure, on top of the nationalized companies that provide the services like transport, water, energy, and so on. The next big transformation is the abandonment of the gold standard and the choice of the US dollar for international trade. After the First World War, the countries at war were ruined. They had no more gold. They have borrowed and printed money to pay for the military effort, all thinking that they will pay back with the victory bounty. The governments had no more gold and they had to stop for a while the convertibility of their currency into gold. And this has created a lot of problems in international trade. Countries like France and England could impose their money on their colonies, but otherwise international trade became difficult. Gold and silver, for some reason, were internationally recognized as a means of exchange, But when people were running out of gold and silver, there was no possibility to trade internationally. And people, of course, are not willing to accept the paper money of another country. So that created a big period of instability. Some countries tried to go back to the gold standard, but for that, the countries had to balance their budget and shrink their economy to the level of gold they possess. So it created a lot of economic difficulties for the people and some recessions. And then we had the Great Depression, and the government needed even more money to fight this misery and to restart the economy. So they printed money, and the war was coming, so they had to prepare for war as well. And all during the war, they continued printing money, moving away from the gold standard. So until we arrive at the end of World War II, when there was an opportunity to put an end to this instability created by the shrinking of international trade and this wild competition between currencies. An international conference was organized to regulate international trade and to put an end to these instabilities that have led to World War II. That's the Bretton Woods Agreement. And then we had this fantastic opportunity to create a single currency, a world currency that would have unified the world with the world government overseeing it. And that would have created peace on Earth. But instead, the delegation of the United States, full of pride, opposed the creation of a world currency and enforced the dollar as the currency for world trade. The United States has largely, immensely profited from the war and has become the economic superpower of the world, all the other economies being in ruin. The United States were in a position to impose their views on the conference. And for a country that claims to be the first supporter of democracy, that was a complete undemocratic decision. Democracy starts with ending all the privileges, and that was an enormous privilege given to the United States. This decision is actually one of the worst decisions ever made. Instead of having an era of peace and prosperity for all, we have still an era of financial instabilities that is likely to lead to another world war, and that could be the extinction of humanity. This decision is already responsible for the death of millions of people around the world and has created so much suffering. The Bretton Woods Agreement were in fact an attempt to return to the gold standard. Only the US dollar was convertible in gold. All the other currencies could be convertible into dollars and fluctuate within a small range. The International Monetary Fund was created to be the lender of last resort, providing the countries were taking economic measures to return within the range of fluctuation. It was possible for the US to print money and to spend a lot of money into the war, the Vietnam War, which was very, very costly, into the space race, and to inject a lot of money in the economy without suffering the consequences of a trade deficit. The problem when a country decides to print a lot of money is that the money, some of the money, is used to buy foreign products, and the trade balance endure a huge deficit, which devalues the currency, which creates inflation, and then you have to stop printing money to stop the inflation, otherwise you will endure an hyperinflation. So it was possible for the United States to print so much money and not be affected because there was such a demand overseas of dollars. Dollars were circulating overseas and there was such a need of dollars, so the dollar stayed strong, even though the US was printing money, paper money, because they didn't have the equivalent of gold to back it up. But the positive thing is that it is because of this trade deficit of the United States that the international trade developed and was made possible. So, but that was a huge privilege for the United States, who got everything, every product. The product from overseas were cheap, the dollar was strong, and they could print the dollars and get all the products converged to the United States. They could have a great lifestyle and finance the biggest army to maintain their position of hegemony, economic hegemony, and at the expense of the rest of the world. So the model, for sure, the America was great. You know, it's like the slave master saying, "Oh, I have a great model, economic or business model. You know, I can print money, and all the rest of the world is working for me." And that's a situation that has been created by the Bretton Woods Agreement. Instead of all the countries benefiting from the printing of money and the abundance of money that could have been made by a single currency, but just one country had this privilege, the United States. And that's created one bully in the world whose interest is to hang on to this privilege and to create chaos all over the rest of the world, to be the strongest economy and have no competition so that it can impose its dollars throughout the world. And it's very clear to see that every country that is challenging the US dollar is under severe sanctions. It was true for Iraq, Libya, Syria, but now Venezuela, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea. And now there is a big threat of a third world war to reverse the situation. The threat of wars and the financial instabilities created by the shortage of money will disappear with the creation of the single currency and the world government. And surely the dislocation of big blocks, because big blocks are the ones threatening the small blocks. So it's better to have a world federation of small entities, small countries, than to have superpowers who can impose their rules on the rest of the world. And then with this huge growth in the trade deficit of the United States, and it was becoming obvious that the United States were spending a lot of money in the Vietnam War, in the arms race, in the space race. So some countries started to doubt that the dollars will be convertible into gold. And some countries who have accumulated a lot of dollars have started to ask the United States for their gold. And then the United States decided straight away to break the Bretton Woods Agreement and stop the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And that was in 1971. But going off the gold standard was a huge risk because the dollar was not backed up by anything and could lose its value and its position as the currency for world trade. So they made an agreement with the monarchs and the dictators of the Gulf to accept to sell their oil only in US dollars in exchange of support and military protection for their regime. Because the amount of money required to buy the oil is enormous, that was enough for all the countries to acquire the dollars and keep the dollar as the international currency. And because also that was very useful to have one currency for all the international trade. So despite giving up the gold standard and the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar kept its position as the world currency for international trade. And the economic dominance and privilege of the United States could continue. So let's go back to our diagram of the flow of money and see how it has been affected by the abandonment of the gold standard. And for that, let's see how the rich, the owners of the means of production, spend their money. First, they spend it for their lifestyle. They buy their homes, their cars, their travels, their food, and so on. They also spend to run their businesses. They buy supplies, they buy machines and build new factories. And the rest, they will seek to convert it into assets that keep or even increase their value through time. Since the money is no more convertible into gold, it is now very much affected by inflation, and no one wants to keep money if it loses its value through time. So the rich will invest their money in different ways. They will buy properties, land, gold, art pieces, hoping they will keep or increase in value. And they can also buy means of production, factories, businesses. But the most convenient way is to buy shares of the business and not get involved in the running of the business. Just get a share of the profits. We can represent this by splitting the flow of money between the rich in two, because there are two markets. There is the markets of goods and services, where the rich buy real goods and services, and the financial market, where the rich sell and exchange their means of production, the share market and other derivatives and financial products. And it also includes the bond market, where the rich lend each other money. The financial transactions in the financial market can be enormous, but they are not creating wealth. It is just rich people selling each other assets. Like a little bit at the casino, even though there is a lot of money that can be exchanged between the players, at the end of the day, it has not produced anything, and it is just a transfer of assets between the players. The financial market can be enormous, but it doesn't create any wealth, and almost none of this money is returning to the consumers as wages. It is a market for the rich, where those who need capitals can sell some assets. In this market, the richest buy the poorest, and the rich compete and eliminate each other, trying to make more money with their money. But this financial market can still have an effect on the other markets. For example, in 2008, when some big financial institutions went bankrupt because they have taken too many risks and being too much exposed, trying to make more money with their money, when you have big players like banks going bankrupt, it can create a cascade of bankruptcies that can crash the whole financial system. But we won't focus on the financial market in this presentation. We'll pay more attention on another way the rich invest their money. It's by lending it to the banks or the government. If you have a lot of money, the safest way to invest it and make money with your money is to lend it with interest to people, to corporations or institutions that you are sure will pay you back. When you invest your money in the stock market or other financial products, it can be more profitable, but it also can be more risky because you're never sure of the life and the performance of a business. To lend to someone who has already a lot of assets, you are almost guaranteed to have your money back. Unlike people or corporations, the government will always be there and has a lot of assets. So when the government needs money, it prints bonds, and the safe investors are rushing for them. For normally a smaller interest, safe investors can also lend money to a bank by depositing it to a bank. When you put your money into a bank, you actually lend it to the bank, and you will receive a small interest for your deposit. And what does a bank do with your money? The bank will keep a small part in cash as reserve, and the rest, it will make money with your money by investing it on the financial market, mostly by lending it safely by buying bonds, highly rated bonds, government bonds, treasury bonds. Those who need money compete with each other on the financial market to attract the money that the rich would like to convert into assets. A corporation can sell a part of its business as shares, or it can borrow money with interest by issuing bonds, which are IOUs, and those bonds can be sold on the financial market. Institutions like governments have no shares to sell, so they issue bonds, and they have to compete by offering the best interest rate to attract the money lenders. So a very important question to ask is, why does the government have to find money on the financial market, issue bonds at a competitive interest rate, when it could create money out of thin air from the central bank to finance itself? The governments have done it in the past, but cannot do that anymore. Why? The reason is that the governments, progressively and all over the world, have given away their power to create money to privately owned central banks. Not only that, they have also passed laws that they will not finance themselves through the creation of money, but through the financial market. Who would do that? Give away your power to finance yourself. This shows you the extent of the power of the moneylenders, who are able to dictate the laws of the governments and the monarchs and take away their financial powers to create their own money. Not only the central banks of almost all the countries all over the world are privately owned, but the owners are also kept secret, highly secret. That's why people speak often of a cabal that has taken control or financial control of all the planet. And that gives a lot of credibility to this conspiracy that we have mentioned before. So the bankers are willing to create money to finance consumers, the loans of the consumers, but they are not willing to create money to finance the government. Why? Why would they do that? The answer is that if we let the government finance itself, then it can abuse its power and create too much money that creates inflation and even an hyperinflation that will destroy the money. For the moneylenders, the politicians and the government cannot be trusted. And to prevent the governments from abusing their power to create money, the moneylenders have taken this power away from them, and now the governments have to beg them for money, and to beg them with high interest rates on their bonds if they want to borrow their money. But there is another very good reason why it is so, and this reason is never mentioned. As we have seen, the problem for the rich is to invest the money they didn't spend. To find good investments is not that easy. Why? Because the market is already saturated. If the purchasing power of the consumers doesn't increase much, or is flat, or even decreases, why invest your money to produce more if those who will buy your product don't have the extra money to spend? For example, why invest building homes for the homeless if they don't have the money to pay the rent? New markets able to attract the money of the consumers are pretty rare, and when they arise, you have a rush of investors, creating a bubble and making the whole investment less profitable and also risky. So productive investments are saturated, lending to consumers don't think about it. So what's left is to lend to the government, which is a reliable, full of asset borrower. But you can only do that if you remove the government's power to finance itself. To maintain the same level of economic activity, the government will not create money, but will have to borrow from the rich, to borrow the money they haven't spent back into the circuit. They will have to borrow it from the rich and spend it in form of social aid or wages. And that will compensate for the lack of purchasing power of the consumers. And here we have the pump we were looking for. The government is the pump whose borrowing from the rich makes possible the money to circulate from the rich who accumulate it back to the consumers. In that way, the money can continue to circulate in a loop. We can simplify the diagram by noticing that the function of collecting deposits is actually a service that can be part of the goods and services that are already offered, and this part of the bank can be separated from the place where money is created and destroyed, and can be added to the pile of means of production of goods and services. At this stage, one can notice that the consumers, who also work for the rich and earn money, can invest their money on the financial market, can have some savings and put them in the bank and earn the interest, and can buy treasury bonds. So they are not represented on the diagram. Actually, they are represented. You just need to consider that they change places. For example, if someone makes money with his money by investing it, let's say that he makes 10% of his total income through investment, then we'll consider that this person spent 10% of the time on the side of the rich, those who make money with their money, and 90% of the time on the side of the consumers, those who work for the rich. In this way, the diagram represents everyone. Let's see the simplified version of the diagram by summing up the flows of money. Let's consider the foreign trade is balanced. Let's consider for the moment that there is no increase or decrease in the money supply. Because the rich are running profitable businesses globally, we can be sure that their total income is greater than their total expenditure. To ensure the same level of purchasing power of the consumers and the same level of economic activity, the government will have to go further into debt and to borrow what the rich haven't spent to return it back to the consumers as social aid or wages. This is very important to understand, and you won't find this information in the official courses given at universities. The problem of the government going into debt is a systemic problem, is a problem created by the system. It is the free market, the problem, the free market that allows the enrichment of the rich at the expense of the rest of the population. A system which is not able to keep a balanced state without having the government going further into debt. So on the diagram, it's very clear. The rich win on both sides. Not only they run profitable businesses by making sure they sell their products more than they cost, but on top of that, they lend the money they have made to the government who needs it to compensate for the lack of the purchasing power of the consumers, and they will lend this money to the government with interest. So it's a double win. All the financial gurus will tell you the way to get rich is to save money. So you make first money, hopefully by making other people work for you, having a profitable business. But then this money, you invest it. If you want to take risk at the beginning and get rich quicker, you invest it in means of productions on the share market. But once you reach enough capital and you want to invest, or you want to invest safely, you lend this money to safe borrowers. And once you have enough money, you can not only live from the interest, but your capital continues to grow. So you make even more money with your money, having other people work for you. And you have become a money lender and a slave master. So that's the model all those financial gurus are giving us, the model we are brainwashed with, the model for success is to become a slave master by having other people work for you while you enjoy making money with your money. Making money with your money would not be so bad if it was not at the expense of others. There is an idea that has been made popular by the rich to justify paying less taxes that says that when the rich get richer, the money trickles down and everybody benefits. But it is a lie. I guess they refer to the time long gone where the kings enriched themselves through newfound gold or plunder, and their spending allowed this new wealth to enter the economy. But at the time, they were not making money with their money. They were actually creating money and spending it. And today it's different. Money is created through debt, and the rich make most of their money by lending it. So when the rich enrich themselves, more debts are created. That means others have to go into debt. So the debts are always increasing, and the system is designed to collapse under the weight of the debts. And we will see that it creates crisis, hyperinflation, destruction, and even wars. The principle is simple. Trade can only last if the exchanges are balanced. If some go broke in the process, then to continue they will have to buy on credit. As the system is designed, the people cannot afford what they produce. Those who own the means of production decide both the prices of the goods and the level of the wages, and they make sure the trade is profitable so they can save money and enrich themselves. That means that the trade between the consumers and the owners of the means of production is not balanced, and the consumers will have to buy on credit or to go into debt. So the system is creating more and more debts, unrepayable debts by design. And the same principle applies for the foreign trade. Normally, the trade between two countries is always balanced. If one country exports more than import, its currency becomes stronger and the other one weaker comparatively. That decreases the export and increases the import until it's balanced. But it is not always the case. Like, for example, in Europe, where all the countries share the same currency. If you have a very productive country producing a lot, like Germany, sharing the same currency and in a free trade agreement with a much less productive country like Greece, the Greeks cannot protect themselves against the flow of products coming from Germany, and they will have to pay by selling their assets. And that will be aggravated by Germany lending to the Greeks so they can continue trading. And the Greeks will go further into debt and be depleted from their assets even more. Same between the rich productive countries and Africa. The rich productive countries lend money to Africa so that they can sell them their products. And they deplete the Africans from their assets and resources even more. The solution would be to develop the means of production of the African countries so they can balance their trade without being depleted. The trade between China and the United States is not balanced. China exporting much more than importing from the United States. It is made possible by China having the policy to maintain the same or about the same exchange rate with the US dollar. When Chinese companies transfer their dollars into Chinese currency, the Chinese government ends up with an excess of US dollars. But this excess of dollars finds its way back to the United States by China buying US Treasury bonds. China doesn't want to reevaluate its currency, but prefers to lend to the United States to continue to sell them its products. We have the same pattern of the owners of the means of production lending more and more money to the consumers to keep on trading. We have seen that since the end of the gold standard, all the money that has been created by creating debt. That means that any single unit of currency that is created, any dollar, any euro, any yen that is in your pocket, there is either someone, a business, or the government that owes this dollar, this euro, or this yen to a moneylender. I repeat because this is very important to understand. Any money you or anybody else earns, it's because either someone, a business, or the government has made a loan to a moneylender and needs to pay it back with interest. I can say it differently. If everybody pays back their loans, all their loans, to the moneylenders, there is no more money in the system. All the money will disappear. So to enrich yourself, even by $1, someone else has to go into debt and to pay this dollar back with interest to a moneylender. It is so important, so I say it again in another way. Every single dollar you keep in your pocket for a certain period of time, during this time, someone, somewhere, has borrowed this dollar from a moneylender and is paying interest on this dollar while you keep it. So you are impoverishing someone and making a moneylender richer. One last time. Every single dollar that's circulating, that you can see, that is somewhere on a bank account or anywhere that exists in circulation, someone is paying interest on it as it circulates. The more money that is circulating, the more interest are being paid to moneylenders. The moneylenders are getting richer at the expense of everybody else. I mean, at the expense of anybody who needs money to do their shopping. But the problem of the debt is much bigger than that. If the money is created through debt, it doesn't mean that all the debt come from the creation of money. We have represented so far an equivalent amount of money and debt, representing the creation of money through debt. But the amount of debt in the system is much bigger than the amount of money in circulation. All the money that has been saved by the rich is recycled into the system as debt. So not only a dollar is created through debt, but this dollar, when it circulates through the loop, can be lent to the government, to businesses or individuals several times over. So the amount of debt in the system could be many times over the money supply. So now consider the payment of the interest on this debt that is going from the people and the government to the rich. It's enormous. The payment of the interest is part of the flow of money going from the people to the rich or from the government to the rich, but it is not creating any wages, unlike when you buy other goods and services. And this payment of interest is independent from the fact that businesses have to be profitable. So the payment of the interest contributes directly to increase the gap between the money going to the rich and coming back to the people, to the consumers. So the whole thing is a big racket. The moneylenders don't contribute to the community through their ideas or their work. They are like parasites who feed on their host until it dies. And we understand now the wisdom of the ancient who were forbidding usury, lending with interest. And we understand why it's forbidden by many religions. So not only we have seen that all the money is created through debt, but for the rich to continue to enrich themselves, more debt has to be created. So the system always creates more and more debt. So it is not sustainable. You cannot increase debt indefinitely. So the system will have to reset itself periodically and go through a cycle. The debt is accumulated by three different actors: the people, the businesses, and the government. And each one has a different cycle. Every cycle has two parts: a period of growth, where one tries to make more money to pay back the debt, and a period of collapse to reset the system and start all over again. If we look at the economic cycle of an individual, what a person earns during his or her life, it looks very much like a succession of stairs. To pay their bills and to pay for their mortgages and their debt, the people will constantly try to earn always more money. They can either work more or get a higher paid job. When they work more, they contribute to the increase of production, but when they ask for higher paid jobs, they contribute to inflation. But it won't be possible for them to always earn more, and they will sometimes lose their job or go through bankruptcy. Their earnings will collapse and they will have to start all over again. But the total collapse is unavoidable. When they die, all their debt is cancelled, and the moneylenders will repossess part of their wealth to recover their debt. The business cycle looks more like a wave. If we represent the flow of money in the economy, we see like a succession of waves. We observe a period of growth, followed by a period of recession, without any plateau or balanced state. To stop the recession and the contraction of the money supply, new money has to be injected. The moneylenders need to be willing to lend again at a low interest rate. And at first, this new money that is injected will directly contribute to an increase of production. It is important to realize that there are two ways the businesses make more money, either by selling more or by selling more expensive. At the beginning of the cycle, we just come out of recession, so there is room to grow, and the businesses are willing to conquer market shares. The businesses therefore will tend to make more money by increasing their production. But they cannot increase their production forever. At one stage, the production will stabilize, either because the needs of the consumers are met or because the consumers cannot afford to buy more. For example, even though everybody wants a luxury car, there is no need to produce more luxury cars if the consumers don't have the purchasing power to buy them. Once the market starts to saturate, the businesses will try to make more money and pay back their debt, not by selling more, but by selling more expensive, and that will create inflation. Inflation is the worst enemy of the moneylenders because it is eating away their money. So they are very vigilant to keep inflation low, and they will start to raise their interest rates to reduce inflation by making their money more expensive, more precious, and harder to get. keep in mind that during a period of growth, the money supply is increasing, and therefore the debt is increasing. So the pressure to make more money to pay back this debt is never going away. As the whole system is going more and more into debt, there is more pressure for everyone to earn more money, and there is more pressure to create inflation. It has created a situation where consumers need to ask for a pay rise, and businesses need to increase their productivity and their prices. The system trying to repay back its growing debt will try to create inflation, and to prevent this and the depreciation of money, the money lenders will increase their interest rates and therefore slow down the growth, slow down the injection of money, and slow down the growth. But the pressure for inflation is still increasing with the growth. Therefore, the interest rates will continue to increase and the growth will continue to slow down until the cycle reaches its peak. At the peak, the amount of money created by new loans is the same as the amount of money that is destroyed by the repayment of existing loans. There is no more increase of the money supply and the growth has stopped. But if the people or the businesses are not going further into debt, the government, as we have seen, still needs to continue to borrow from the rich, and this time at a higher interest rate. So the pressure for inflation is not going away. But this time it's not possible for the money lenders to raise the interest rates without decreasing the money supply. That means businesses start to lose money, some are going bankrupt, jobs are lost, the purchasing power of the consumers decreases, and that starts a cascade of bankruptcies and job losses. The businesses don't seek to expand and make new loans. The money lenders are hesitant to lend money, but people still are paying back their loans. So you have a contraction of the money supply. And all these effects added together in a short period of time makes the fall much sharper than the growth. The economy will spiral down sharply into recession. When the supply of money contracts, a lot of people are losing money and we are creating more misery. And not only we are creating more misery, but we are destroying our capability to produce, which actually could solve this misery. Understand that we arrive at a situation that is completely absurd. We have developed means of production to satisfy our needs, and because now there is this contraction of money and this shortage of money, we need to destroy those means of production and endure misery, but this is completely stupid. Especially when we can create money out of thin air. The recession is not created by a shortage of resources, it is created by the shortage of money, which can be created at will, and we can have an unlimited supply of it. So we understand why the people are angry and revolt. During the recession time, there is a lot of social upheaval, and they are right, there ought to be a better way. But let's continue with the absurd. During a recession, almost everyone is losing money. People are losing money, the businesses are losing money, and the banks are losing money, and some banks are going bankrupt. Banks can create money, and they go bankrupt. Why? Why is that? It's very important to understand how money is created. The commercial banks, the banks that people use for their deposit and their loans, can't actually create an unlimited amount of money. They are required by law to keep, let's say, 10% of the deposits of their customers as reserves, and they can lend the rest. The money that has been lent will return to the banks as deposit, and 90% of it will be lent again. And the process will continue But because each time there is less and less money to lend, the process will stop when there is no money left to lend. If we now sum up the amount of money that is in the bank account of the people, we end up with 10 times the amount that was initially deposited. The bank didn't create actually money, it created debt that has been used to back up the supply of people's account. In this process that we call fractional banking, the banks have increased the money supply, but 90% of this money is not available. It is not actually in the bank's safe. It is owed by other people. That 90% of the people's accounts is not available, for the banks is not really a problem, because when people do business, they need to retrieve money and they give it to others who return it back to the banks. So 10% should be enough normally to cover the variation of cash flow. And more the transfers are electronic and the cash is disappearing and the money won't even have to leave the banks. The problem comes when you have a lot of people defaulting on their loans, like it is at the time of a recession. Then if a bank doesn't have enough assets to cover its losses and balance its books, it will go bankrupt. And also when the people lose confidence in a bank, they all want to empty their account at the same time. That's what we call a bank run. And because the bank only keeps a fraction of the deposits as reserve, it will go bankrupt. So in our example, the commercial banks can only multiply by 10 an original amount of money that we can call M0, and this amount of money can only be created by the central bank. So the whole money supply is not controlled by all the banks, it is controlled by the central bank. The central bank creates M0 and the commercial banks just multiply it by 10 to optimize their business. To increase M0, the central bank will print money and buy with it treasury bonds from the public on the financial market. And to decrease M0, it is the opposite. The central bank will sell its treasury bonds on the financial market, and the money it will get from the sale of the bonds will be kept away from circulation or destroyed. In this way, the new money that is created by the central bank is backed by the treasury bonds. So it's a bit confusing because we have the impression it is the government that has created this money with treasury bonds, but actually not. It is the central bank that, to introduce this money, buys treasury bonds. It is not the government which makes the decision to create the new money, it is the central bank. And it's important to know because the central bank is a private business with shareholders, and the names of the shareholders are kept highly secret. There are a special group of money lenders that we can call the money masters because they are really in control of the money supply. They can create M0 and all the money they want with an unlimited amount independently from the government. And how do the money master know the amount of money they need to create or retrieve from the market? They actually don't know. But what they are interested in is to lower as much as possible the interest rates so that a lot more people can borrow their money and it will contribute to growth and prosperity. And they want to do it without creating inflation, or at least up to a level of inflation they can tolerate. But it is up to the commercial banks, which are private businesses, to decide their own interest rates. However, when the money masters decide to decrease the interest rates, they buy from the public their treasury bonds, and the public puts this newly created money into the banks. The banks end up with more money to lend, and more money to lend means more competition in the lending business, and the interest rates will naturally decrease. And reversely, if the money masters want to increase the interest rates, then they will sell their treasury bonds to the public, and the money they will collect from the public will disappear from the bank accounts of the commercial banks. So they will have less money to lend, and less money to lend means they will increase their interest rates. So by monitoring the money supply, the money masters can also monitor the interest rates of the commercial banks. Therefore, it is this little group of money masters, and not all the money lenders, that controls the economic cycle and make all the important decisions. And there are 3 important decisions in the cycle. The first important decision is to raise the interest rate to limit inflation. And that will be the beginning of the slowdown of the growth. And that's when the economists, or most of the economists, at least those who work for the money masters, are very misleading, because they justify increasing the interest rate because the economy is overheating. We are injecting money too fast, and that creates inflation. And that's very misleading, because the economy is not overheating. If the economy is overheating, that would mean that the shops are empty. That means that the people have so much money, spend money so fast, that the production cannot follow. But the shops are full, and there are plenty of people unemployed, many needs to fulfill, many people still living in poverty. So the economy is not overheating. There is not too much money in the economy. The problem is that there is too much debt in the economy. And that's creates inflation. Inflation, there is 2 main causes for inflation. The first cause for inflation is inflation itself. Inflation creates inflation. When some people raise their prices, other people follow. The cost of living increases and everyone raises their prices. And the second main cause for inflation, it's when people and businesses have too many bills to pay. And when they have too many bills to pay, they need to raise their prices. And the main bill is to repay for the loans and for the debts. It's big debts that increase with the money supply. So the pressure of the debt creates a pressure for inflation. And it's not the increase of the money supply that creates inflation. It is, yes, in a way, because we create money through debt. But the real reason is the debt, not the money. There is not enough money to absorb all the production, so we cannot speak about overheating. To be honest, we should say there is too much debt in the economy, and that creates inflation. Therefore, one of the main reasons for inflation is for the system to alleviate the burden of its debt. The second most important decision the money masters will make during the cycle is the decision to start a recession. And they will do that by raising the interest rates to a level that will contract the money supply. If they cannot avoid creating a recession to reset the cycle, they can still choose when they will reset the cycle. And this has given them a lot of political power, because they can decide to start a recession just before an election, for example. And if a government is not compliant enough, they can create a recession and economic difficulties to sway the elections for a more suitable candidate. It has been done many times in the past, and it is still being done today. And the third important decision the money masters will make during the cycle is the decision to stop the recession, increase the money supply, and start the period of growth. And these two can give them political leverage, because the government is dependent on the willingness of the money masters to increase the money supply. At this stage, you understand that the main decisions for the economic cycle are not made by the government, but are made by the money masters. They are the one who decides when we have a period of growth and when we have a period of recession. We are used to hear the government taking all the credit for the prosperity and the economic growth, and also shifting all the blames during the hard times. But now we understand that they are not really in charge. Those who are really in control of the economy are the money masters. We will better understand the role of the government in the economy by studying the last debt cycle, the government cycle. If the business cycle looks like a wave, the government cycle looks like a tsunami. To understand why, we can have a look at the debt of the government, and we see that it always goes up. And so it's a big concern for the economists, and especially because each time they try to address or reduce the national debt, they put the country into recession. And we have explained why. Because to maintain the level of economic activity, the government needs to spend money. If it doesn't, the purchasing power of the consumers will decrease, and that creates recession. Remember, each time the consumers buy something, not all the money is returning back to the consumers as wages, because the owners of the means of production keep a certain amount to enrich themselves. So there is always this slack of money that is not returning back, and it is the government, by spending money, who will compensate for this slack. So it can give this money directly to the consumers through social aid, or by paying wages to the civil servants, but also it can give it indirectly by just spending the money. For example, if we take the case of the United States, with their huge spending on defense, the government creates a lot of jobs and wages for the consumers. So the United States, who claims to be a liberal country, actually now with this huge spending of the government, you have more than half of the population who works directly or indirectly for the government. So it is halfway to be a communist country where the government employs everybody. So here is what is important to realize. With the free market, whatever the government, whether it is a government far on the left, social liberal, or whether it is a government which is ultra-liberal on the far right, the government will still have to spend the same amount of money just to avoid the recession. And it is the amount of money that the owners of the means of production keep aside to enrich themselves. The governments only differ by the way they spend the money. The social liberals on the left tend to increase the size of the government and therefore give more wages to the civil servants, and as well as increase social aid, and that will contribute directly to the purchasing power of the consumers. And then you have the ultra-liberals, who tend to decrease the size of the government, decrease social aid, and they try to privatize everything. But they still contribute to elevate the purchasing power of the consumers by paying private companies which offer jobs to the consumers instead of the government. If the government has two different ways to spend the money, it still needs to find the money to sustain the economy. It cannot get this money by taxing the consumers, because this money is meant to be given to the consumers. It could tax the rich, but this will not work, because the rich will transfer the cost of the taxes in the price of their goods and services. The consumers will end up paying for the taxes. There is no way the rich will give up enriching themselves. So if the government takes them some money, they will get it back from the consumers. Taxing the rich will end up creating inflation and be completely useless. If the government has to spend money but cannot get it from taxation without defeating the purpose, it will have to borrow it from the rich. And therefore there is no escape for the government, whether they come from the left or from the right. They still have to go further and further into debt
just to sustain the economy. And this is why, whatever the government, the national debt is always increasing. And that's why the politicians and the economists who blame the government for going more and more into debt are really mistaken. Because this is a systemic problem. This is not a government problem. And all governments who try to reduce the national debt just end up reducing the purchasing power of the consumers and create recessions. But the government cannot go into debt indefinitely. There is a limit. So what is this limit? The limit is when the creditors, the rich, lose confidence in the ability of the government to pay back its debt. And you know when this happens, when you see the government being desperate for money, it starts to sell all its assets. Transport, airport, energy, water, everything it can sell. And that's all the privatization that we see at the moment. But then when we have the government running out of creditors willing to lend it money, then we have the big collapse, what we call a depression, the tsunami. The consuming power spirals down, leading to bankruptcies, leading to bank runs. It could all be preceded by an hyperinflation because the currency is backed by government bonds. So if the people lose confidence in government bonds, then you could have the devaluation of the currency and an hyperinflation. And of course, you create the conditions of big upheaval and revolution and wars. And the government trying to shift the blame and find a scapegoat. So it's very likely that the country goes to war and you create a big destruction. And that's the condition also for the emergence of an authoritarian government who will restart the system with a new currency. And after this destruction and the cancellations of all the debts through hyperinflation or by changing the system, you restart the cycle and you make room for a new period of growth. For us who live in the Western world, we have been told by our educators, by society, by the media, by the politicians that we live in the best possible economic system. And now I hope you realize that it's far to be the best. A system that needs periodically to reset itself, destroy its productive infrastructure and create misery, it's certainly not an optimum system. Or at least it's not optimum for everybody. Because for a very small minority of people, it's actually very good. For the money masters, those who are in control of the money supply and the economic cycle, they can profit during the period of growth, but they can profit even more during the recession. They can sell their vulnerable assets just before they decide to start a recession, and they can buy everything at the lowest market price just before they decide to restart a new period of growth. The money masters are actually a very small amount of families. They control all the central banks, but also all the major banks in the world. And because they have accumulated so much wealth, they also control all the transnational corporations, which have been proven to be all interconnected and controlled by a small amount of people. So they exercise an enormous control over the economy that has given them enormous political power and mediatical power. This is the reason why we never hear about them and the extent of their power, but we know they exist. And we start to realize that they manipulate the information to make us believe we are free to rule ourselves by choosing our own government. But actually our government is not the real power, and is certainly powerless to change the status quo, to change the system, and to oppose the control of the money masters. You can realize the power of the money masters over the information
by noticing that no serious politicians have been in campaign against their power and their control. But just over 100 years ago, it was a very important political issue. And you could say the same about the economists. No serious, or I should say academic economist today is in a rebellion against the economic power of the money masters. So this system is working very well for the money masters, but it's also working for the money lenders and the rich, who are the same, because the rich are both owners of means of production and money lenders. They invest their money in shares and own parts of the means of production, but also they buy bonds and lend their money to banks and to people, to businesses, and of course to the government as the most secure investment. As we have seen, the free market, which relies on private property and free competition, gives an enormous advantage to the rich. And in the last 200 years, they progressively acquired all the powers, including the one of creating money. The free market has now evolved in a system that is controlled by the richest and that is designed to enrich the rich and enslave the people through debt. A system that makes sure the people cannot afford to buy all the production they need or they want, a production that, by the way, they have themselves produced, without borrowing from the rich, so that the people keep coming back to work to repay their loans. The supporters of the free market don't realize that the free market they think of as long gone. The free market for the individuals, where the people could come and sell and buy their products freely. Now it's a free market for the corporations. And there is no competition between the corporations and the individuals, because the corporations win all the time. The free market for the people, it's a job market. It is a competition to serve the rich, to serve our masters. So what they think of, what they defend in the free market, it's a free enterprise. We should be able to start our own business and to be a... And this is very good. Free enterprise is very good. But here as well, the entrepreneurs have no chance. As soon as they need finance to expand their business when they grow, then they have to give away part of their businesses to give it to the money lenders, to the rich, to those who have money, and who will buy share of their business until progressively they lose the control of the business. And the rich will take over their ideas and their business and make most of the profit. And the greatest success of our elites is to make us believe that we are free. We believe that we are free because there is a way out. There is a way out. If you work very hard, if you save money, you too you can become a moneylender and a slave master. So the door of the jail is open, and we all know it's open, but it's so narrow. It is so narrow, and we have to compete with each other to go through. And the very few who succeed become the heroes of our time. We see them everywhere, on covers of magazines, on TVs. The entrepreneurs of the people who made it to the other side have been given to us as models and make all of us believe that it is possible to all go to the other side if we follow their examples. But no, only a very few can because of the competition. Only a very few can be selected. And selected to what? Selected to a parasitic life where you make money with your money while other people work for you or are paying back the interest on their loans so you can enjoy your freedom and your lifestyle. You have been selected to become, you too, a slave master. But thankfully, The free market, which is the basis of capitalism and liberalism, which has created so much suffering, so many wars, so much misery, through competition between people and between nations. Thankfully, this system, this awful system, is now dying and will disappear forever. And this will be created by the last transformation we are going to see, which is the arrival of the smart machines. If the arrival of the machine has brought the Industrial Revolution and the transformation of the free market into an enslavement of the people by the rich, the owners of the machines, the smart machines will put an end to this free market and bring the greatest liberation in the history of humanity. Why? Just because the smart machines will take over the jobs. The smart machines are going to free humanity from having to work for a living, which is the basis of the free market. For the free market to function, we have seen that the flow of money that is going from the consumers to the owners of the means of production needs to come back to the consumers. So it comes back through the wages. The consumers are working for the owners of the means of production. But we have seen that it is not enough, and it creates already some dysfunctions, because the system has to go into debt to make the businesses profitable and sustain the purchasing power of the consumers. When you reduce the number of jobs, you reduce the purchasing power of the consumers, and therefore you reduce the level of consumption and the level of economic activity. Less jobs, less people can afford the production, so less production, less profit, less jobs, and it is a down cycle of recession. That's why our economists and our politicians are desperate to create jobs, to give jobs to the people. Now, when you introduce a technology that makes things faster, better, and cheaper than people, the people will lose their jobs, and it will crash the whole economy. In the market economy, as it is running now, the introduction of smart machines, which should contribute to prosperity, but no, it's creating more misery. All the gain of productivity is going to the owners of the means of production and is not returning back to the consumers who have lost their jobs. And this is crashing the system. And the economists of the free market are in sheer panic. There is no way the economy can survive a massive loss of jobs. Ironically, it is the free competition, which the free market is all about, that is responsible for its collapse. To be more competitive, you have to be more productive, and to be more productive, now you will have to use smart machines instead of people. So you cannot avoid a total collapse without giving up free competition, without giving up the freedom to use smart machines and sack the people, without giving up the principles of the free market. So the free market is a sinking ship, and the economists and the politicians are trying to find a fix. They are observing the worsening of income inequality. And for sure, all the gains of productivity are now mostly benefiting the owners of the means of production at the expense of the consumers who are losing their jobs. So an idea that we hear sometimes is that why not create a tax on the smart machines? And the money collected through this tax will help those who have lost their jobs. It will not work for several reasons. The first one is that when we tax the businesses, the taxes are transferred to the price of the goods and services. So you increase the taxes, but you also increase the prices of the goods and services, so you just contribute to inflation. And the money you want to give to the consumers, they will have to spend it through inflation. Another reason is that if you tax the machines, you will have other countries who don't. And we would be very happy to host your businesses and offer them lower taxes and better conditions to increase the profits. Another good reason is that it will slow down the liberation of the people from having to work. No human being should have to do what a machine could do. Ethically, it is better to discourage the businesses to hire people, and we should encourage them to use smart machines. Taxing the rich will not be efficient, but it is also very difficult because of all the loopholes and because of all the controls the rich have on the politicians, on the governments. There is another idea beside taxing the rich that is having some momentum at the moment, is the universal basic income. The idea is to give everyone a minimum amount of money to live, so we don't have this terrible misery created by the smart machines. The problem is, how do you finance it? Taxing the businesses, taxing the rich will not work. So where does the money come from? So the government could nationalize the banks and create its own money, but all the money it will create and give to the consumers will end up accumulating in the pockets of the owners of the means of production. If it is accumulating, the money will become worthless and be devalued. So it has to be recycled. So it will be recycled maybe by buying all the assets possible from the consumers and the government, buying their houses, buying all the land and everything they could buy. Or the government will recycle the money from the rich by borrowing it. And then you still have the problem of the government going into debt at an even faster rate than it is now. Realize that the universal basic income is like a band-aid that will help the system avoid massive starvation and misery. But it doesn't fix the problem of wealth inequality. The universal basic income, it is like slaves asking their masters for more food to survive, when the real problem is the chain they have, and they need to focus on freeing themselves from their chains, and not find a fix to the system that enslaves them. To avoid its collapse, the system will certainly try to create a massive injection of money through big projects and put everybody at work, hoping to restart the growth. But it will not work. The rich, the owners of the means of production, will get richer and will recycle their money buying all the assets of the consumers and the government, and you increase even more the inequality. Housing will become unaffordable, buying land will become unaffordable. All will be owned by big corporations and the rich. It's already happening this way, and it will just accelerate the process. There will be no way we can save the free market from the total collapse created by the smart machines. We will have to change the system. The new economic system that will replace the free market will need to find answers and solutions to the dysfunctions of the free market. And in our analysis, we have found 5 dysfunctions, 5 big problems of the free market. The first one is the control of the economy and the money supply by a small group of private individuals, the money masters. The second problem is the use of the currency of a country, the United States, as the currency for international trade. The third problem is the creation of money through debt. The fourth problem is the government that needs to always go further and further into debt to maintain the flow of money or the circulation of money in the economy. And the fifth problem is the loss of jobs and the decrease of the purchasing power of the consumers due to the arrival of the smart machines. So the first problem, the ownership of the banks and the central banks, it can be solved very easily by nationalizing the banks. And this is the first step, and it is for the government to regain the control of the economy. And all the politicians or the economists that don't put that in their program as one of their priority, or the most important priority, that means two things. Either they don't know how the system works, or they are the servants of the money masters, and you should not listen to them or vote for them. The money masters and their minions should be judged and answer for their crimes, the most horrific crimes that lasted over centuries. And all the money they have acquired should be returned to the community because it comes from a racket. We'll do that for any mafia, any racketeers. They need to be deposits from their wealth and the source of their power. It is important that they are known and exposed and made powerless. We need to know who they are, what they did exactly, and we can always forgive them once they repent and repair all the crimes they committed themselves and their family before them. We will be able to change the system once we remove from power those who profited from the old system and want to keep the status quo. The second problem that needs to be fixed is the use of the US dollar as a global currency for international trade. Here as well, it can easily be solved by creating a world currency as well as a world government to supervise and control it. A world government is a necessity in a world that is interconnected and interdependent. What we do in one part of the planet can affect all the other parts. It is very important to realize that the creation of a single currency will actually be the most important decision we can make to unify the planet and bring peace and prosperity to the whole world. More than the language, the religion, or the culture, it is a currency that has united people to form countries, to form empires, and a single currency will create a planetary civilization. It is the use of the same currency that allows the removal of frontiers between countries. It is the free flow of goods and services that contributes to unite the people, because by trading they mutually benefit each other. People become interdependent from each other, and therefore they need to be friends and unite. The creation of a single currency and the necessity for a world government to control it will prevent all the wars, because it will be impossible for countries to access or create the money that is necessary to go to war. And once a world government can create its own money, it has the financial means to address the global issues like demilitarization, overpopulation, and the pollution of the planet. We will understand even better why the single currency will bring peace and prosperity by looking at the next big problem of the free market, the creation of money through debt. We have seen that if the money is created through debt, for some people to have money, you need other people to go into debt. And if some people enrich themselves and accumulate money, that means other people have to go further and further into debt. And when you have some debt, it's like a burden, it's like a chain, and you need to be at the service of others to repay your debt. This ensures that enough people are coming every day to work to sustain the system. But we have seen also that the problem of the debt is responsible for the economic cycle and the periods of recessions. We cannot increase the money supply to have more prosperity without also increasing the burden of the debt. And to explain with an image, we can imagine a man at the bottom of a mountain, wanting to climb the mountain, and each time the man makes a step up, he puts a stone in his backpack. The further up the mountain he goes, the heavier the backpack. So how far up can he go until he rolls back down? So applied to the economy, it translates into how much can we increase the money supply until the burden of the debt is so heavy that we create a recession. So here the solution is easy. We don't have to create money through debt. Why did we create money through debt in the first place? Because the money masters wanted us to. Once we have nationalized the banks, it is possible to create our own money without going into debt and without paying any interest. So there is a big discussion at the moment about how to end this debt slavery money system, and some would like to return to the gold standard. It will be a big mistake because we will always be limited by the amount of gold. Money shouldn't be something rare or precious. It's a tool that needs to facilitate the exchanges. But if it becomes rare, it's a big handicap to our development and our prosperity. So it has to be something not in abundance, but in adequacy with our ability to produce. Our production shouldn't be limited by the amount of gold, but the amount of resources we have and our willingness to work, because we might choose to spend our time in other things than to work more to produce more. Another problem with the return to the gold standard is that it will give some privilege to the countries that produce gold. And you will create all the geopolitical instabilities to acquire the gold mines. And you will have all the powerful countries trying to get the control of the gold by force. There is another idea that is proposed at the moment, is the cryptocurrency. It is interesting, but we have the same problem as gold. The cryptocurrency, as it is designed at the moment, is made to be rare. It gets its value by being precious. And so it's like gold. And it is very limiting for your development. It is a speculative currency that you want to keep because you know that with time it will increase in value. So it is ill-designed to be a currency that can be used for exchanges. Another big problem is the energy that is required to mine the cryptocurrency. And why do we have to use so much energy when we can create money out of thin air, when it's so easy to create money? So it's not necessary. This waste of energy is a very big problem. And that's why, as it is at the moment, the cryptocurrencies are not the solution. The cryptocurrencies and all the alternative currencies are in fact a reaction of the lack of circulation of the money in the system and the lack of trust in those who create the money. And this will be solved by the nationalization of the banks. It is up to the community to create its own money and to put in charge the people or a system they can trust. The money, the currency, actually doesn't need to be backed by anything. It doesn't need to be created through debt. It just needs the trust of the people to use it for their exchanges. And if a community is in charge of its own money, it automatically trusts it. So we need to nationalize the banks, but also we need to create a single currency, a global currency, if we want to get rid of all the financial crises. And I mean by that the contraction of our production, the bankruptcies, the high unemployment, and the decrease of the purchasing power of the consumers, which is completely unnecessary and undesirable. When a country creates money and gives it to the people to increase their purchasing power and the prosperity. The problem is that people buy more products from foreign countries, and they also want to travel. So it will put pressure on the trade balance, and the currency will be devalued. So you can create as much money as you need, but you have to close your frontiers and prevent the people from buying products in foreign countries and travel. So you cut yourself off from the rest of the world. You cut yourself off from the technology and the resources that are in complementarity to your economy. In a world where countries have different currencies, a country cannot create all the money it needs without having its currency being devalued. That's why, and it's very important to understand that and to explain to people how important it is. That's why the single currency is the solution, so we can create all the money we need without any devaluation possible, because it is the only money. We can never run out of money. We are not limited by any quantity of precious metal or the willingness of the people to borrow and to lend. With a single currency that we can create in large quantity without being devalued, we will never run short of money to supply the economy and prevent all the recessions. Yes, the single currency means that you need to surrender part of your national sovereignty, an important part of it. But it is about time that we merge and we unite and feel like one humanity, create a planetary civilization. It is the key for our global prosperity and world peace. So the single currency is an important part of the solution, but it is not enough. You can create all the money you need, but you need also the money to circulate and not accumulate somewhere. And that's the next problem we need to find a solution for, which is the ever-growing debt of the government, which tries to sustain the flow of money in the economy. Those who accumulate money don't actually want to keep it because of inflation, and they want to convert it into assets, so they buy land, properties, businesses, shares, but it could be cumbersome or risky, and the safest and easiest way is to lend money to the government. In this way, the money that is accumulated by the owners of the means of production is recycled by the government through the government spending. The debt of the government is always increasing, and this is not sustainable and will lead to a total collapse. So we have to find a solution where the government doesn't need to borrow money to sustain the economy. We have already seen that the government needs to nationalize the banks, own the banks, and create its own money without debt. So it can now create all the money it needs without borrowing it from somewhere. But now we have a conundrum. The owners of means of production will continue to accumulate money. And the only way to recycle it will be to buy assets, all the assets possible. And the owners of the means of production will accumulate all the wealth. They possess the consumers of their land, their properties, and the government from all its assets, because of their need to convert their money into assets. So here there is already a solution that exists. It is a communist model. If the community owns the means of production, it is the community which enriches itself and accumulates all the money, all the profit and the gains, and can redistribute it back to the community. So it is a model that is at least sustainable. But if we nationalize all the means of production, we create another problem. We have to restrict a lot of freedom, the freedom to create your own job, start your own business, and develop your own ideas, and the idea of free enterprise, which has been a very important factor for our progress. Communism is not giving enough incentive to the people to motivate them to make any progress. Those who contribute more to society should be rewarded accordingly. So the solution that we present here is not communism, it is what we have called humanitarianism. This system seeks the well-being of the whole humanity, hence its name. It advocates the creation of a world government and a single currency and a world language that we have already seen, but also the abolishment of property ownership without establishing communism. There is no more property, except, as we will see, for the family house. There is no property because everything is borrowed. We came on earth with nothing, and when we will die, we will live with nothing. And even the atoms and the molecules that make us are just borrowed because there is a continuous flow of matter through us, and we are just borrowing it. So we don't own anything. The community owns everything and rent everything to the people when they need it. We don't sell, we rent. We don't buy, we borrow for a maximum amount of time of 49 years. And after 49 years, it returns back to the community. Let's take a typical example of a man, age 21, who has just finished his study and starts his working life, so he can choose his profession and may work for a salary, or he can create his own business, and if he creates his own business, it will belong to him until he dies. But when he dies, it will return to the community. He can decide to stop working for his business, but it cannot sell it. He can only rent it for a period no more than 49 years. He can also rent a part of his business through shares, but no more than 49 years. He can build a house or rent a house for 49 years, and after 49 years, he may live freely in the house until he dies. So at 21, he can build or buy a house from the community and pay it in a monthly payment for 49 years, and at 70, he will be able to live for free in his house until he dies. And after he dies, the house can go to his children, where they can live there for free. And if he has no children, the house will return to the community. If the man has acquired several houses during his life, only the family house can be transmitted to the children for free. All the other houses will return to the community. It all comes down to the abolishment of inheritance. Every possession, every source of income, everything of value will return back to the community when someone dies, except for the family house that is transmitted for free to the children. The abolishment of the inheritance and the renting system will achieve three things. First, the installation of a more equalitarian society. Everyone will have the same opportunities at birth. It will be the end of the big fortunes that have accumulated over generations, and everyone will be able to enrich themselves only through their own labor and talent. And second, the community will progressively end up owning the means of production, while at the same time allowing a private sector to operate. There is still free enterprise, and the people can create their own jobs and try to enrich themselves if they want to. So we have a bit of mix of both worlds. We have a strong public sector, like in communism, to make sure that the community has the means to look after everyone. But also we allow people to enrich themselves and contribute with their ideas and their work in a free enterprise, which is the good part of the free market. A business cannot grow too big on its own without the financial assistance of the community, and therefore the community will progressively take over big businesses. It will ensure that the private sector plays a minor role in the global economy. and therefore private individuals will not have the power and the means to control the community. The community will acquire progressively all the big corporations and all the industries that are essential to human needs, like energy, transport, housing, and food. The community will not seek to make profit on the consumers, and it can even produce at loss. Everything the community owns can be free. And on top of that, the replacement of the property by a renting system will discourage the accumulation of wealth. Why possess many houses, many cars, many boats, when we have to pay rents on each one? We cannot use them all at the same time. To accumulate material wealth will be costly and a waste of money. People don't own anything, they just pay for the usage of everything they need. Everything is returned to the community after usage or after a limit of time of 49 years. The money is not subjected to inflation. On the opposite, the community which doesn't seek to make any profit will reduce the prices of the goods and services it offers as the productivity increases. It will be more interesting for the rich to keep the money they don't spend than to invest it in hard assets like land, properties, and other stuff they don't use. And that will not prevent other people from enjoying them. That the money that is accumulated and not converted into asset is not circulating anymore, it's not a problem because the community can create the money when it's needed. It doesn't need anymore to get the money from the rich to prevent them from acquiring hard assets and impoverishing the community. Even though this system will allow the enrichment of people, it's a big improvement on the wealth distribution. And it gives the community the means to look after the sick, after the poor, and all the needs of the community. But there is still one big problem to address. It is the takeover by the smart machines of the jobs. A very large part of the purchasing power of the consumers come from the wages. So if the smart machines take away their jobs, you have a decrease of the flow of money and you collapse the economy. But if the takeover of all the jobs by the smart machines is a big problem for the free market economy, it's actually a blessing and part of the global solution. The smart machines actually are bringing the greatest liberation of humanity. Thanks to the smart machines, we'll make possible the creation of a society where the people don't have to work for money. No one will need to enslave other people to work for them, because we rather use robots and smart machines. The smart machines will make better slaves. Just like we didn't need horses anymore once we knew how to make a car. A car is a better means of transportation. And the smart machines make better workers. And for this reason, the disappearance of the jobs is unstoppable. Exactly like the Industrial Revolution or the use of electricity were unstoppable. Well, in fact, the only way to stop it will be to self-destroy. So here we are arriving at a critical crossroad. Either we have a revolution and we destroy everything and we go back to the Stone Age, or we have an evolution and we reach a new level of civilization that is equivalent to a paradise. Every technologically advanced civilization that has reached the level of the smart machine has the same system of society as a paradise. And we call this system of society Paradism. Let's find a common definition of a paradise, and I think we all agree that a paradise will be a place where everyone has enough and we all do what we enjoy doing. There is no need for anyone to work for money to live. So what does Paradism, the system of society of a paradise, looks like? Well, we have already a good idea that is given by the religion. In the religion, you have a God who is all-loving, who loves everyone individually, and he has his army of angels helping him or her to realize all the wishes of the people. And the people are nagging God constantly for everything they need and they want, and God having all the power and the means to realize all their wishes. That's how most people imagine the paradise, and it is the ideal society we dream of. And that is also how Paradism will look like. But instead of a God, you have an artificial intelligence that is all-knowing and all-loving, who loves everyone individually and knows everything about everybody, all their needs and their wishes, and is in communication, in constant communication with everybody at the same time, and as an army of robots producing everything the people ask for and delivering all the goods and services the people require. And who owns the AI? The people, the community. And who owns and controls the means of production? The AI, and therefore the people, the community. So it's a form of communism. Communism without working class. But like communism, all the means of production are owned by the community. And like communism, there will be no intellectual property. Every idea, every creation will be shared with everybody else, so that everybody can benefit from everybody else's ideas instantly. And the sharing goes even further than that, because the robots and the technology will provide a state of abundance and everything will be free. And for this to take place, we will need two things. First, the population needs to stabilize to levels that allows a state of abundance. If we are too many people, we cannot satisfy the needs of everyone without depleting the planet. And how do we know how many people we should be? That has to be defined scientifically, but we know that it is dependent on the level of technology we have. With a higher level of technology, we might be able to be more people. But with our current level of technology, we will certainly realize that we are already overpopulated. The overpopulation issue should be the number one problem of our world government and of all the governments in the world. If we want to access this state of abundance, we have to certainly depopulate. That means we will have to use birth control and discourage having children until we reach the right level. And once we are there, we will have to have no more than one child per person to stabilize the population. So stabilizing the population to the level that is allowed by our technology is the first condition for the state of abundance, where everything can be free. And the second condition is that we have to abolish property. Because everything is free, if everyone owns the things they use, it's impossible. There won't be enough storage. And I don't even mention the problem of waste. So we will have to share. Even a tennis racket is not necessary to be owned. We need it only when we use it. It's true for the car, and it's true for most of even all the stuff we own. We actually don't need to own anything. We just need the free and easy access to the things we need. So we will have to share. The paradise, the state of abundance where everything can be free, is only possible if we are willing to share. In fact, property is only quite recent in the history of humanity. The original way the people were living in the past was that they share everything. There was no ownership. They owned very little, and they were all living from nature, from the abundance of nature, and they didn't own any tree, any land, and because they didn't own anything, in fact, they owned everything. They had free, easy access to everything. So one can wonder at this stage what will be the political system of Paradism. Well, there won't be any politician. The people can directly communicate to the AI their needs and their views, and they don't need to be represented by anybody. To satisfy all the needs of the people, how many cars, how many hospitals, how much food we need to produce, and to optimize the freedom, the well-being, and the happiness of the people, you don't need to be from the left, from the right, or the center. It's a scientific problem, it's a mathematical problem that will be better solved by the AI. There is no politician that can process all the data and find the optimum solution better than an AI. So it will be the end of politics, but also it will be the end of economics. There will be no money, so no need for wealth distribution, no need for a complex science to decide who gets to what, because everybody will have free access to everything. Economics is the science to administrate scarcity. The world that is coming is a world of abundance. What could be necessary is a group of wise people supervising the AI, just to make sure that the AI does correctly what it is asked. And this group of people can be selected at first scientifically to make sure they are the best people for the job. And we can then choose democratically among them those who will be part of this committee of wise people. And to make sure we select the best among us, we need to determine scientifically what are the conditions necessary to participate in a vote. For example, it is reasonable to think that to vote, you need at least to be intelligent and informed. Basically, we need to make use as much as possible of the best tool we have at our disposal, the scientific method, to select the best among us, the geniuses, the most intelligent and the most capable people, and the wisest people possible, not to control us with power and authority, but to guide us and to supervise everything. It is a selective democracy to select the geniuses to lead us, and we call it geniocracy. Paradism, a paradise without work and money, which is led by the most brilliant people, is the society we are heading to and is unstoppable. Why? Because every single one of us wants to live in a world that is better and easier, where we can be more free and happy. Generation after generation, we have all contributed to make this world a better place. We are optimizing everything and making things better and easier for us. So, of course, we end up developing this amazing technology that is freeing us and creating a paradise. And we have the privilege to be the generation that will make the transition toward this paradise. It's a privilege, but it's also an enormous responsibility because we have to make it happen. If we are not willing to let go of our old ways and old system of thinking, we will self-destroy. We have to let go liberalism and the free market. We have to let go nationalism. We have to let go all this competition to acquire the resources and unite and share everything. We are at the doors of a paradise on earth. All that is required is more love and sharing, so that we can all enter. It's all of us or none of us. We have to do it all together. It's ridiculous to fight in Syria, Libya, in the Middle East and all over the world. And this is ridiculous when you consider that just in a few years we could all be living in a paradise. Our priority now should be to disarm and unite and make sure we avoid self-destruction, because the future that is awaiting us is fantastic. We need to transition safely to Paradism, and we can do that by adopting humanitarianism, what we have seen before. That is the collectivization of most of the means of production and our ethic system, and put all our energy into developing the technology that will free us from having to work, robots, artificial intelligence, but also genetic engineering, because we will have to have a technology that is completely integrated into nature. If everything can be made biologically, all the waste can be recycled by nature. We have now the technology to clean the air, to clean the rivers, and to repair the earth. We just need the economic system that will give us the means to do it. We will repair the earth, but also we will repair the people. The people have been formatted into the compliant workers the system needed. Our value system has been designed to make work the purpose of people's life and their source of self-worth. But actually, for the people to realize themselves, they don't need to work, they need to be free. So stop supporting politicians who try to create more jobs and make people work. The people don't want to work, they want more freedom. So support instead the politicians who want to give the jobs to the smart machines and who want to free the people. Like any other living beings, if we let the people free to do what they enjoy doing, they will do the very things that contribute to their health and happiness, but they will do also the things that contribute to the health and happiness of the whole society. Therefore, the people don't need to be controlled, but they need to be free. By expressing themselves, by expressing their DNA, they will do exactly what is necessary for the survival and the happiness of the whole society. It is when we prevent the people from blossoming in the direction of their choosing that we create the conditions and the frustrations that leads to violence and conflicts. Paradism, this new society that is coming, will be a great liberation, and it will create the environment and the conditions that are necessary for the people to blossom and to express and explore all their potential. Without any work, the people will not just sit there and do nothing. There will be a lot of activities. They will have fun. They want to play. The people don't want to work. They want to play. They want to dance. They want to party. They want to make love. They want to meditate. They want to create art, scientific research, travel. They won't have enough time to do everything they want to do. This new society is not a dream. It's a reality that is nearly there. What is a dream, or rather a nightmare, is this society we are living in. This society is not possible, it's not sustainable. It can't be a reality anymore. If we try to keep it longer, if we continue to compete between each other, we will self-destroy. The only possible future we have, it's a paradise. So this is a fantastic hope we can have now. It's not the time to depress. This future is not a dream, it is achievable by this generation. So let's make it happen.